The judgment and crucifixion of Jesus. The city of Jerusalem stirred restlessly in the early morning hours. The narrow streets echoed with hurried footsteps as a crowd gathered outside the governor's palace. Roman soldiers, their armor glinting in the dim light, stood guard as the Jewish leaders pushed a bound man forward Jesus of Nazareth. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, sat upon his judgment seat, weary and uncertain. He had dealt with insurrections before, had seen countless men brought before him in chains, but this man was different. He was calm, composed, not the desperate criminal Pilate expected. The chief priests and elders stepped forward, their voices urgent. "This man claims to be the king of the Jews. He stirs up the people, teaching against Rome." Pilate narrowed his eyes and turned to Jesus. "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus met his gaze and answered, "You say rightly that I am a king, but my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest. But now my kingdom is not from here." John 18:36-37. Pilate was taken aback. This was no ordinary man. There was no arrogance in his voice, no rebellion, only a quiet authority. He looked back at the priests and elders. "I find no fault in this man." The religious leaders protested angrily. "He has deceived the people. He started in Galilee and now he brings his blasphemy here." Hearing that Jesus was from Galilee, Pilate saw an opportunity to pass responsibility. He sent Jesus to King Herod, who was in Jerusalem for the Passover. But Herod, after mocking him and demanding a miracle, grew bored and sent him back. Pilate now stood again before the raging crowd. It was the custom to release one prisoner during the Passover. Pilate presented them with a choice: Jesus or Barabbas, a violent criminal, a murderer. The people, incited by the chief priests, shouted, "Give us Barabbas!" Pilate, frustrated, asked, "Then what shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ?" The crowd roared, "Crucify him!" Pilate hesitated. His wife had sent him a warning. "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I suffered much because of him in a dream." Matthew 27-19. But the voices only grew louder. Pilate, seeing that he could not calm the uproar, called for water. Before them all, he washed his hands, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." And so Jesus was handed over to be scourged. The road to Calvary. The Roman soldiers stripped Jesus of his garments and tied him to a post. They took a whip embedded with sharp pieces of metal and bone and struck him again and again. The lashes tore through his flesh, sending rivulets of blood down his back. When they were satisfied, they twisted a crown of thorns and pressed it onto his head, mocking him. "Hail, King of the Jews!" they sneered, spitting upon him and striking him. A heavy wooden cross was placed upon his torn shoulders, and he was led out of the city toward the hill called Golgotha, place of the skull. The crowd jeered. The women of Jerusalem wept. Jesus, despite his agony, turned to them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" Luke 23:28-31. Weakened from blood loss, Jesus stumbled under the weight of the cross. A man named Simon of Cyrene was pulled from the crowd and forced to carry it for him. At last, they reached Golgotha. The crucifixion. The soldiers laid Jesus upon the cross and stretched out his arms. The first nail was driven through his wrist and the second. Pain exploded through his body. Finally, his feet were nailed down. With a great effort, they lifted the cross, dropping it into place with a jolt. Above his head, they placed a sign: Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. The religious leaders protested. "Do not write the King of the Jews, but that he said, 'I am the King of the Jews.'" Pilate refused. "What I have written, I have written." Below, the soldiers divided his garments. casting lots for his robe. The crowd mocked him. He saved others. Let him save himself. Luke 23:35. Even the two criminals crucified beside him spoke. One hurled insults. "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him. "Do you not fear God? We are getting what we deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he turned to Jesus. "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus, in the midst of his suffering, answered, "Truly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." Luke 23:43. Darkness fell over the land. The sun stopped shining. For 3 hours, the sky remained black. Then Jesus cried out in agony, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Matthew 27:46. His strength fading, he looked toward heaven and said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Luke 23:46. With one final breath, he said, "It is finished." John 19:30. And he died. At that moment, the earth shook violently. Rocks split apart. The great temple veil, which separated man from the presence of God, was torn in two from top to bottom. A Roman centurion, witnessing it all, fell to his knees. Truly, this was the Son of God. Matthew 27:54. The burial and the hope to come. The crowds dispersed. Evening approached. A man named Joseph of Arimathea, a follower of Jesus, went to Pilate and requested his body. Carefully, he and Nicodemus took Jesus down from the cross, wrapped him in linen, and laid him in a new tomb carved into rock. A great stone was rolled over the entrance. Roman guards were placed there. The world fell silent. The disciples hid in fear. All seemed lost. But 3 days later, the grave would not hold him. The stone would be rolled away. Death itself would be defeated. For Jesus Christ, the Son of God, would rise again.